Welcome to the EntrePastors podcast on YouTube. This is a show that helps pastors think, act, and thrive as prosperous entrepreneurs. Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the EntrePastors podcast on YouTube. Hey, my name's Jon Sanders. I'm one of the co-hosts of the show here, and you're getting ready to watch episode 31. And in this episode, we're having a conversation. This is going to be a two-part series where we're talking to the authors of the book Part-Time Pastoring. In this week's episode, we're going to be talking with Andy Littleton, and next week we're going to talk to Sean Benesh. These two guys wrote the book Part-Time Pastoring, and it really fits. The message of their book fits so well with our tribe and our message here at EntrePastors. We believe that it's a good thing when pastors have something out in the marketplace in addition to an income that's coming through pastoring. If they can have another business of their own on the side or something that they're monetizing to really help their family financially, it's not only a blessing to their family, it's a blessing to the church that they lead, to the communities that they serve. We think it's a good thing. And so we are so excited to have this conversation today with Andy Littleton and know that you're going to get a lot of value from it. So without any further ado, let's cut to this interview that Les and I did recently with Andy Littleton. Check this out. Well, Andy, it is a pleasure having you on the EntrePastors podcast. I feel like I'm talking to a celebrity after having just read your book. Welcome to the show, man.
Oh, man. Yeah, I feel like I'm talking to the celebrity and I'm just a normal guy sitting in a little boring office, but thank you. That means a lot.
Awesome. Well, you co-authored a book called Part-Time Pastoring. And, you know, that word in and of itself to some might sound like a negative thing. It might sound like it has a bad connotation, but as we explore this together, we're going to quickly find out that's not what you guys mean by this whatsoever. So why don't we start here? Just if you don't mind, give a brief introduction to our audience of yourself, your life, your journey into pastoral ministry, and then we'll start talking about the book and why you wrote it. And I've got a bunch of questions about it for you.
Great. Yeah, sure. My life, let's see, so much, but I think I've looked back and I've recognized that there was always an entrepreneurial side of me. An elder lady that I knew growing up, she would remind me that I actually, when I was a kid, I would try to sell her rocks at her door. And she had to say, honey, those are my rocks from my yard. And so, you know, the heart is deceitful, seems to be true in my case as well. But I was always that kid that I thought, you know, I have a problem, I want to solve it. I would offer, I'll dig that stump out of your yard. I'll do whatever I have to do. I was always kind of trying to figure out how to achieve my goals and start basically little business ventures. That didn't click for me until later in life that had always been there, but it really has. Always kind of enterprising. And so, but I grew up super poor. I was kind of in a definitely a lower class kind of situation. My dad had lost his job in the lumber industry and had tried to kind of regroup, and that didn't work out so well. And so I grew up in trailer parks and that kind of situation, but also my parents put me in private school and they sacrificed a ton to do that. So I also have this kind of between two worlds side of my story where I very much learned, my friends, when I was growing up there, you know, I remember one of the kids' dads had his BMW and his car phone. We drove a Ford Pinto that burned oil. And I had to kind of learn how to navigate in both of those spaces. And that's still very true of me today, not just with wealth, but also business and church. I grew up in the church, believing family as well. And so that was always there. But I actually started into ministry when I was 18. So I'm 39 now. So I've been interestingly in ministry 21 years. Wow. So along the way, I've done full-time work, but also throughout, I've had a lot of stints in various other roles. And so that all comes into play. But when that felt like it clicked in for me was when I planted a church here in Tucson and realized the kind of church I wanted to plant was going to have to be very grassroots and take a lot of time and I was going to have to just figure out another way to get it started. And so I started a business at that time and had no idea how much I would really embrace that idea, that it would actually become part of my strategy for ministry. At the time, it was just sustainability. But as time went on, I realized this is going to be my strategy. This is actually working way better than I thought. It might be even a key component to our church being the way that it is. So today, our church actually has all bivocational staff, and we only send missionaries and other ministers who are bivocational unless their context demands that they can't do that. So it's become a very keystone piece of my work.
Well, one thing very early in the book, it was actually the foreword. You didn't write this, but one of your, whoever wrote the foreword, Rod, I don't know how to say his last name, but
Rod Huggins. Yep.
yeah, he has a statement in the book that, again, it's in context. I don't want to take it out of context. So if you just heard what I'm getting ready to say, it could sound negative. And I don't think he means it this way. And I think this really frames well a narrative that has been around the church world and pastoring. But I'm just going to read one little quote. He says, being forced into bivocationalism smacks of a problem that ought to be addressed. Either pastors are at fault or congregations are. And again, there's a deeper context behind it, but for many, we think of this idea of a pastor that has to have a job outside of, their pastoral ministry, and they're forced into that, and it's this grudging thing. Like it's a problem in most people's mind. Many pastors have this identity of, man, I'm not a full-time pastor, I'm a part-time pastor, and that's not a good thing. And so it's either I'm not worthy of being in the big leagues as a pastor, or the problems with my church. And I think it frames that really well, the tension you guys are tapping into in the book. So we'll get more into that, but I'll just let you respond to that. When you talk about part-time pastoring, y'all aren't saying it as a negative statement, right? Like some might have been conditioned to think of being a part-time pastor as a bad thing. You've come to see it as a good thing, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny because Rod he's a mentor of mine, and in a way he is actually bivocational himself. So he's pushing on that a little bit to say, really in the ideal situation, you know, your pastors are worthy of double honor, which actually means double pay. So they should have plenty of provision coming from the church. That's how it should be. But you can even look at the life of the Apostle Paul and see that even he realized that wasn't how it was going to be. And for missional reasons, you would choose not to do that, as he articulates to some of the churches that he ministers to, especially the Galatians and such. So I would say there's an ideal, and then there's a missional decision that you can make. And that's a missional decision that we've made, and we think is actually a really good choice. So if you go around, especially in my context, a very post-Christian city, saying, I want to reach people who don't know Christ, who have been kind of hurt by the church, those are people we're specifically trying to engage with. And then you tell them, and by the way, I'd like to make twice as much as you while I'm at it. That strategy probably isn't going to work very well. And I just know it won't. So we've made a choice because we think it's a good and right choice, even though it doesn't maybe match up with, perfect shalom and the way things ought to be. So the book, the name of the book, as you mentioned, we chose it. It was kind of my move because I said, I'm not trying to write a book to the people that have all the terms down. If you've read enough to be able to articulate what co-vocationalism is, you're probably generally familiar with this. If you're kind of sitting in a chair going, oh my gosh, I think I might need to take a part-time job, I want this book to be for you, or your friend who feels that way, to help you move out of that kind of dread into seeing this actually as a strategy, as a missional strategy. So we know that probably better terms are bivocational or co-vocational, but also from a vocational perspective, you would do your pastoring part-time, and you might do something else. Like for me, I manage and run a retail store part-time. So it's an okay term, even though there are probably better ones out there. But the point of it is to catch that person who's thinking in terms of really like, I don't know if I can afford to do this ministry full time. Maybe I should quit. And we want to say, no, 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 no. Think strategically. This could be an opportunity. I mean, I just had this conversation with a guy. I referenced one in the book. I had a very similar conversation the other day where a guy sat down with me and said, I'm trying to raise support to do ministry full time. And I said, what else do you do? And he named off some things. And I said, those are amazing ways to connect with your community. I don't even know if you should stop doing them. Have you thought about that? What if it was a cohesive strategy and it all provided for your family, but you saw these as tentacles that get you out into your context really effectively? So, yeah.
And we're definitely going to go down deeper into that arena of how having some kind of job or entrepreneurial thing outside of the four walls of a church building, how that can really be a missional and almost more impactful ministry than what happens inside the four walls of that said building. But I want to back up and ask a more broad question here for just a moment. You talk about in the book some trends that you see happening in the church right now and probably likely to continue in our culture that are going to have an impact on the church that really make this conversation even more of a necessity. Do you want to go into a little more detail about that? Like, what do you see happening in the church world where it's like, man, things are shifting and the day of church as we knew it, kind of a traditional model where a pastor has the luxury of a full-time salary is probably becoming a thing of the past, at least for many churches. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just obvious. And the pandemic, which Sean and I, released this early in that stage, so we wrote a lot of it before, is a whole nother level of look around. You don't have as many people showing up to church. Some of those people, gave through the pandemic, but there's what everybody's now calling the great reshuffling, where a lot of people are changing churches or religions for that matter. And there's a lot of opportunity in that, but also the days of kind of the loyalty to churches, structures, denominations, funding streams, mission organizations, it is not really the same. People think of giving differently. People used to just take, here's my 10% to my church. I might give a little bit more to my to the mission agency. Today, people are, they'll consider that if they Venmoed their friend $20, that's part of their giving for the month. And people don't work as consistent of jobs anymore. There's a lot of gig workers. I was just talking to somebody who's starting a new app for giving in the church because gig workers just forget to give. They have like all this random money coming in. So they're trying to create an app to help those people who are dedicated to giving. But also just generally post-Christian, a lot of, neighbors of ours, my age, one guy, I said, what's your church background? He was doing something with me and he said, nothing, and the nuns, and there's books about that. I've got one on my shelf back here. That demographic is growing substantially. And some of those people, because they don't connect to religion anymore, but some of them just seriously have no experience in it. So I probably referenced a few other things, but that all of that, and then you just look at the numbers. I mean, churches get less in giving in general. Denominations, the giving is way down. Networks, there's probably a few. I think if you really find a channel where people are super angry or like feeling like this is the only place where they can be heard, that might be your best shot at like making money in ministry. But unfortunately, there's a lot of besetting sins available in those spaces too. So anyway, I'm
picking up what you're saying there. One thing you said in the book, and I've heard this same metaphor. You didn't go as in detail as much on this, but this idea that like in the economy, you're going to continue to see some of these big box retail stores.
Oh, right.
And then you see, the mom and pop boutiques. Like in the church world, I've heard that metaphor before, that we're seeing the mid-sized churches that have, historically in the past have been able to support full-time staff members and certainly a full-time pastor. those middle-sized churches are going away. We will still have kind of the big box church. I think there's still a place for that, but
Yep.
more and more, I think we're going to see the church flourishing in these smaller expressions that are more, boutique to some extent, which again is amazing missionally, but it probably opens up some challenges financially to that model of I just want to be a pastor and that's it.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. Thank you for reminding me. You've clearly read my book more recently than I have. Yeah, that's absolutely true. And I think another piece that I don't even know if I worked it out as much in the book, but the boutique church potentially, say, take our church, for example, here in Tucson. It's very much that. We created it for a niche group of people in Tucson who I can kind of identify, and our people generally understand what that niche group is. But you're not going to build a huge audience in that group, probably ever. But we do well with that demographic. And to do that, if you looked at our budget, there's enough budget for one typical pastor salary, like one living wage. And if you added benefits in there, that would stretch it. But we have currently 4 staff. We just planted a church and we had 5 before that. And typically, if you looked at our budget and our numbers, you'd go, why are you planting a church? Why do you have so many staff members? Well, it's not just that. So I could be full-time if I did every single role in the church, including ones I'm terrible at. So to have a diverse team that actually rounds you out and does ministry well, that's a whole nother thing, where for the boutique church, maybe you could support one full-time staff member, but you're probably not going to have a diversity of gifts and strengths that like you should to really do ministry well. So for us to have multiple bivocational folks allows us to have a diversity of leadership, bring different gifts to the table.
Yeah.
That's one piece of it strategically. And the other is just that we're all connected to the community in vital ways.
Yeah, that's awesome. One thing I'd love to hear you talk about is, well, I've read the book, so I know, but share, if you don't mind, for our audience, a little bit of the stuff you've done outside the church. Because again, it's not like you've just been punching a time clock for a company over on the side. You have kind of a number of things. So tell us a little bit about that, if you don't mind.
Yeah, very much a number of things. So if you were to break my role down at the church, I come off as, I guess, like a lead pastor, though we don't call it that. I preach the most, and I've been there the longest. Well, actually, our worship leader, we did a church merger years back, so he's been there slightly longer than me. But I'm the one that people perceive as the older pastor, if you will. So that's true, but also one of my key roles is community engagement at this point. And so I'm on a business association in the area, which is, I actually joined it as a way to connect the church to the businesses, but actually my business at this juncture has an office within the area of the business association. So I'm there for, connected through both entities. And we do volunteer work in the community. So we find community organizations. This is another piece of our strategy. For us to be bivocational and small, I can't be like an event coordinating company as a church, which a lot of churches, I feel, basically are event coordinating companies. I can't do that. That's not a good use of my time. So we connect to the community through things that they're doing. So that builds relationships. We don't have to organize events, but we're still part of great events in the community that we can wholeheartedly get into and serve. So we actually spend a lot of time out in the community. We're just not the sole organizers of that work. So for me, I'm pastoring the church. I'm kind of the liaison to the business association and community activity work. And I do a little bit of, actually, there's a leadership development side of trying to get other people who are engaged in out of the box missional ideas active in our city. And then I co-own a retail store. So there's a lot of pieces to that. And that's, I've had to strategize around how to do that. But the basic Yeah, it remind me of the nuance of your question, because there was something else I was going to say, but
Well, mainly just
Oh,
what's the work you're doing outside of, pastoral ministry, kind of your other jobs, your other streams of income.
yeah, so I get some denominational support for doing that leadership development and kind of connectivity work, which is great. That's a huge gift. Um, there's the pastoral work, there's the retail store, and then dribble in stuff from like coaching and book sales just a little bit.
Gotcha.
what is
But
the retail store, Andy? Is that a bricks and mortar physical thing, or is it online where you can do it remotely, or what's that look like for people that they're hearing that and that's sort of in their wheelhouse in terms
Yeah.
of that and ministry? What's that look like?
Yeah, it's both. It's primarily brick and mortar, though we're working on, I think we need to see more online. That's a muscle I'm trying to develop, is kind of the e-commerce side of that.
Mhm.
And that there's a strategic hire we just made that I think is moving us more in that direction. But the brick and mortar side of it, for me, in my context, is important because one of the strategies of our business is to connect with local makers and just be an excellent outlet for their work, and kind of a place where they can be known, cared for, and their wares can be sold. It has a service side to it. Like our aim to profit is so that we can do that well. If we don't profit, we can't do that well. So it's very relational. It's very relationship building. So my next meeting is about a potential expansion of that. And our store is beloved in the city because local makers want to have their stuff in it, and they like working with us. And we have a background in production, both myself and my co-owner. And so we know what it's like to produce items, try to bring them to market. Usually creative people don't really know how to price things, sell things. So I have a background in retail. I have some retail management, and I've been a maker. So I realized, oh my gosh, I have this pastoral background, but I also have some unique business background that can help me help others. So the physical space feels much more important as far as that goes. But the e-commerce side is just it's a way to grow and share those goods further. And honestly, for us, the summers in Arizona get very hot, and brick and mortar retail drops.
Right.
So it's a way to survive the summer.
Well, it sounds like you're very, very intentional even to marry the ministry. There's a service component of that often isn't there with somebody that's bivocational or co-vocational. So is that an LLC that's set up individually by you, or is it actually something that's a DBA under more of the ministry of the church?
It's a separate LLC, for sure. And I actually think in this case, that's the most appropriate.
Yeah.
It very much, our church understands it, knows that that's a big thing for me, but the church itself doesn't feel like they run it. Mm-hmm. So there is a definite, as far as organizationally, structurally, there's a separation.
Okay.
But with intentionality and within the kind of mission statements of the two, you can see very clearly the tie. So we kind of have an internal mission statement for the store that shows the kind of relational ministry service objectives of this store, though the store is not explicitly Christian at all.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's interesting how you're putting together your team. You said you have 5, I think you said, team members that are pretty much cut from the same cloth, it sounds like, or at least this is their a part of the DNA of the church model. So that's interesting to me. So would you speak to, this is almost the which came first, chicken or the egg kind of deal. Are you looking for people that go into this sort of the way that you have and saying, no, I'm called as with a hybrid sort of life. There's ministry, there's marketplace, and then they kind of, there's a space that they come together. Is that what you're seeing? Or are you seeing people that have the intention maybe of coming out of a seminary or a local church context where they're thinking what we would consider full-time vocational church employee, but along the way, out of necessity, or their thinking just changes and it's like, no, I'm going to shift over to this model. And I think because part of it, I would guess, is sort of organic. You're probably developing, there's a leadership pipeline probably in your church, in your fellowship, where you're developing people that may already be in the marketplace that then come over to have more skin in the game in the church. Is that pretty much the way it is?
Yeah, there's definitely DNA set within our church because it's a plant. And we've never had the pastor out of seminary. In fact, I graduated with my master's like a month ago. So it's
Congratulations.
Thank you. I thought it would never happen. But so even when I started, I wasn't like, I'm out of seminary. I was like, I'm still working on it, but we're doing this. It kind of, we started because we had a like-minded group in the city that wanted to have a church where they could invite this kind of niche group. And so we didn't start because we didn't look and go, you know what, we've got the credentials, we've got the money, let's do this. We started because we said, we have the people and the idea, let's do this. And that's a very different, I'm not saying one is definitely better than the other, but that was us. So the DNA of we're going to do whatever we have to do to make this work has always been there. And I love it. That's important. It would be very difficult, I think. And even in our denomination, I have other leaders that go, how could, we'd like to be more community engaged like your church. And I think, and I go, well, I'm thinking about your life. I don't know if you've personally ever been community engaged. You graduated high school, you went to college, you went to seminary. This is your first job at this church. Or, not really, but it's your first full-time gig. Like, you're going to have to become integrated to your community and community life to get your church there. Our story is just so different. So it'd be hard to kind of, for somebody to enter in like that. So that means most of our leaders kind of get that DNA from the get-go. So our worship director, he's also an elder. But he is a sound tech. And so he actually did University of Arizona athletics for a long time. Our church meets in the evenings and always has, and we have dinner together. That's very key to our model. So a church that meets in the mornings, just hired him. It's actually a really cool fit because it's a church where I used to work and there's a lot of good relationships. So he now works at 2 churches, but he, for the longest time, was the sound tech at all the U of A basketball, football games, and he still picks those up every once in a while. An interesting one would be our new pastor who's joined us. He joined us a while ago, but he's kind of been developed from within our church. He probably was thinking full-time ministry, and I think we sort of embedded this tri-bivocationalism in him. Number one, because he really liked our church and wanted to be a part of it. And I was saying to him, well, there's no other way because we don't have that kind of money. So if you want to be here, we're going to have to think strategically about what you do. But he's actually found he's a good writer. He actually is introverted and he really loves when he has time to kind of just be alone and work. And we found some really good methods where he can do good, engaging work, usually involves content creation. That helps support him, that also honestly gives him a break from the drain of ministry work. So he's come around to embracing that, though it wasn't his original idea.
Cool. One thing, I just want to back up a few steps in the conversation. I feel like you're being really modest about something. When you referred to yourself as a maker or someone you've produced some stuff in the book, it sounds like you have built with your hands some pretty incredible like furniture and custom design type stuff. Is that true?
I built along with others. I no longer own that company, I should say, but it's still active. And a friend of mine who was the lead craftsman took it over. It was a bit of a COVID pivot in a way, but also I think it was a really good move. But essentially, when we first started, I was like, hey, my dad has an old Toyota truck he doesn't like. I think it's cool. I could put a roof rack on it. I can go do projects. That was my first idea. I got hired within about 3 months of that to be the main kind of maintenance facility guy for a coffee company. And then the owner asked me if I could lead a build out for that shop. That build out included some custom work, like big mesquite live edge countertops. And I thought, well, I can go hire that out, or I can hire me to do that, because that's really expensive stuff. And I think I can get it done. So I hired a buddy of mine. We did these beautiful mesquite tops. And basically, I hired myself. And those got us recognition. And then we started getting these other side gigs. And eventually it turned into, we were kind of one of the top 2 or 3 custom furniture and finish shops in town, I would say. Still pretty well known. So it's really cool to drive around. I see that Toyota commercial where the dad is like, son, I built that. There's a bunch of like really cool spaces, bars, restaurants, custom homes, where I drive by and I'm like, we did a lot of the beautiful work in there. Yeah, so that very much became a source of, like, I mean, we were published, there, articles got in design magazines and stuff like that wasn't all about us, but we were the one. It was like, this was made by Midtown Artisans, and that was pretty cool. So yeah,
Oprah has washed her hands in the sink that you built. So you got to go read the book to hear that story. But that's, now why our audience knows why I said you're being a little modest about that. Here's what I love at EntrePastors. We highlight some of that entrepreneurial stuff. The church stuff, I love it. I'm passionate about it, but we're coming at it from that angle of wanting pastors to just embrace these things. So that's where I love kind of drilling down into the stories of, what do you do? What are creative ways for pastors to earn a living and serve people really well and do some creative things? And so when I was reading that part of your story, I was like, I know a pastor that I'm going to share your story with him, because he builds tables and some other furniture on the side. And it's such a release for him to kind of get out of the church world, take off that pastor hat and build something that you can actually look at and go, that's finished, and so much of what we do in church life, it's never finished, and so I think that's what speaks to me about some of those jobs where you can just do a project and go, look what I built, it's done. So I wanted you to geek out on that for a little bit for our audience. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, it is fun. And we got to do some really, really cool stuff. And even just recently, there was a really interesting, event that kind of brought all of this together. If you have time for a quick story here, but there was we were doing we with the business association, we did a mural painting event on kind of the main street of Tucson. Now that myself and Jon, my co-pastor, we both have a role at the business association. He's content creator, he's on staff with it too, and I'm currently the president. And so we were kind of part of the idea for this mural event, and it got voted on by different people in the community. They looked at different designs, people got to have input. But we combined the mural painting with a bike riding event, and the bicycling group is a secular group here in the city who we've volunteered for years. So they trust us a lot. And I think we're like the only church that they look at and go, yeah, we'll work with them, whatever they want. So we came to them and said, would you combo an event with our event? And they said, absolutely. So we're doing this event, a couple hundred people show up to do a community mural that's on the main street. This bicycling organization's there. The business association people are there. And then there's like 15 of our church volunteers are kind of running the thing, which is awesome. And a lady comes up to me, or she came up to one of our volunteers, and she said, isn't there a pastor like that's part of all this? And he said, oh yeah, he's my friend. He's over here. Do you want to meet him? And basically she came over and she said to me, so I've been doing the biking events and I've been following Midtown Artisans, which was the shop, for years. And I found out there was like a pastor connected to these things. And I've just, never seen that before. And I wanted to meet you. And we were having a little conversation. And then about 2/3 into that conversation, she opens up and says, I used to go to church. And you could tell she's kind of like putting out there, like, I haven't been, this isn't a part, but it used to be. And like, is there space for me in your church? And I was able to see that, and I just said, hey, I think you'd really like our church, and just I want you to know it's right down the street. Here's what time. You can come anytime you want. We're going to feed you dinner. And it was a cool moment of seeing that public exposure that happened through the business, through the sink that Oprah washed her hands in or whatever. That's interesting and cool and all that. But also that's what helped somebody realize a pastor is involved in everyday meaningful work, that made them go, that might be the kind of church I could talk to as somebody who's been disconnected. So that it brought it full circle, where it's not just about doing the cool thing or being in front of everybody. It's like the strategy for me is to get into the lives of people that aren't walking into church. And so there is this missional ministry side, and that was like cloud nine, walking away from that conversation going, there it is. That's what we're doing here. Yeah.
I love that. Thanks for sharing that story, man. That's inspiring and encouraging. I have one more question for this part of the interview, and then I'm going to wrap 2 questions up into our backstage portion. But in your book, you said something that really resonated with me. You challenged pastors to stop basically trying to live someone else's story. And I think that's so common in ministry. We've been told what it means to be a pastor, what it looks like. And so we put this pressure on ourselves to do this, and you're challenging them to basically write their own stories, to give themselves the gift of being themselves. And like, what would that look like to show up in the world as the individual that God made me to be? And what could that, how could that affect my ministry? So I'd love for you just to say a little bit more, challenge the pastors that are listening to this, that have been trying to live someone else's story. What would you say to them?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, and one of the things we try to do in the book is create space to explore that story that you have with God and the unique things that you're built for. Because we've said, and I want to make clear, every bivocational path is not the same. It has to do with you. I've talked about how from childhood, apparently, I've been figuring out ways to solve problems and make money, but have also, even since I was 18, had this sense of call to be in ministry. And so there's a combining of those 2 unique things, which creates part of what I do. And then something about my growing up in the middle of wealth and poverty and so on has a lot to do with the specific things that I do. So I would hate for anybody to hear my story and go, oh man, I just don't have those kind of ideas. I don't have what it takes. I mean, I think that my co-pastor Jon is an example of somebody who has a very different story, very different set of gifts, but there's a path that works for him. And so I would just say a key thing here is not to just don't worry about keeping up with others. Really seek, who has God made me to be? What's the journey I've been on with God? A great practice would be to journal out, just, God, what's the story I've had with you? What are themes throughout my life that you have put into my life to further your kingdom? And those are, everyone's going to be absolutely different. But then as you do that, I also think you'll start to see little blips, little themes of things that go, that's something that could be integrated into my ministry. And maybe that's even part of how I get funding, it's it's strategic. So anyway, I would just say, whether that's, we can look at because there will be the guy that graduates seminary, or just the absolute like lightning rod personality who has the giant church or whatever. And it can be easy to go, oh, I'm not that. But listen, they have 1,000 people from the city go to their church, but my city's got 1 million people. There's a bunch of people that don't relate to that at all. There's a bunch of people that relate to you, or maybe there's 5. That's okay. Like, God's trying to reach the world.
Yeah.
You have a really critical role here, and learning that story, integrating that in, is important. I've spent way too much time wishing I was somebody else. So I would just encourage others to fight that.
That's good, man. Just to have the permission to live the life that God created you to live and to live out your story. So here's what I'm going to do, Andy. This has been so good. I'm going to wrap up 2 last questions I had. I'm going to say them here because there is one. I'm going to let you respond to one thing on this side because I just want to encourage pastors with it. And then we're going to go backstage and go deeper into this. But you really challenge pastors this reality of a lot of times people that are in bivocational or part-time pastoring, they still take on the weight of full-time pastoring.
Oh, yeah.
They try to do everything that pastors that full-time pastors do in addition to the work that they do outside of the church. And you flat out say in the book, never sign up for that. It's not fair. So I'm going to let you respond to that piece there in just a moment. But backstage, I want to go deeper into this question about time management. How in the world do you get it all done? Because in the book, you do talk about some ways that, that you're dealing with that. You've got so many of these things on your plate. How do you get it all done? But just say a word briefly to the pastors that are on this side of the podcast here about not signing up for some unrealistic expectation when you're trying to do multiple things.
Yeah, that's a great way to disappoint people and kill yourself right there is sign up for something you just don't have capacity for. And so I even think, honestly, if you're full-time and you're signing up for roles that you're just not able to fulfill too. And so that's a hard conversation. And we all, I think sometimes we're just trying to get a job and trying not to disappoint people, but it's just way better to have that conversation on the front end and say, look, here's the available time that I have. Here are the gifts and strengths that I can bring to the table. Here's what I don't really bring to the table. And so, if this is what I can offer, I think that's a nice thing at our church is they know that I've got some specific strengths and there's some others I just do not have. And we're going to have to find somebody else to do that. Could be a volunteer, could be a deacon, could be another elder, or maybe we need to hire somebody. But that's just such a worthwhile conversation. And the other thing, just quick, I found is people want to be involved in your church. So this is a great way to offload. Sometimes it's more about us just wanting to feel like we can be everything to everybody. Well, being all things to all people doesn't mean you do everything for everybody. That means that you just try to relate and understand people from all different types of backgrounds. But you let other people carry the load with you. Honestly, that's what they want to do.
That's really good, Andy. Thank you for that. And as we just sort of wrap up this part of the conversation, would you just let folks know how they can get their hands on this very helpful book, very timely book, and then what the best way to reach out to you is, or especially if they're in your area and would like to come and talk more or look at this real unique model, how could they do that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've got a little landing page, andylittleton.com. You can find church book. I wrote another book, a travel memoir about my father and people like him too, that I think it's probably also my book on leadership, oddly enough, the more I think about it. And so you can find those at the landing page as well as other content, podcasts, and our church. So andylittleton.com will send you wherever you need to go.
We are very, very thankful that you came on and we just appreciate you and what you're doing and your willingness to invest in the folks that are listening to this. So thank you, Jon.
Thanks,
back
Andy.
to you.
Pleasure to be with you.
Well, hey, thanks for watching this episode of the EntrePastors podcast. Make sure you hit that subscribe button so you can be notified every time we release a new episode. If you'd like to get connected to other pastors who are learning to think, act, and thrive as prosperous entrepreneurs, then we invite you to check us out on Facebook. Just search for the EntrePastors Connect group, answer a few of our simple questions there, and we'd love to include you in the conversations. And if you're really ready to go to the next level, then we invite you to join our EntrePastors membership community. When you become a monthly subscriber, you will receive access to courses, exclusive community, and coaching that will help you along in your own EntrePastors journey. If there's anything else we can do to serve you, please visit us at EntrePastors.com, and we will do our best to serve you there. God bless everybody. See you soon.